Denver sports tonight on this Monday night in the Mile High City. He's James Merilatt. I'm Will Petersen. We will roll with you for the next hour, getting you caught up after the football season ends on Sunday. The Chiefs are officially a D-word dynasty, 3 of the last 5 Super Bowls. And James, you say at denversports.com, the Broncos aren't doing anything at all to end this Chiefs dynasty that we officially saw take off last night in Vegas.
Yeah, I just look at it of when the regular season ended. The Broncos' last game was January 7th. They were much closer to the Chiefs on that day than they are right now on February 12th, right? And now part of that is the Chiefs got better during the playoffs. Their offense sputtered a lot during the regular season. They looked much more like the Chiefs in chunks. I mean, in the first half yesterday, they looked a lot like they did struggling during a lot of the regular season. But the drive in overtime, you march right down the field, you get a touchdown to win the Super Bowl. It was vintage Chiefs. It was vintage Andy Reid play calling. It was vintage Patrick Mahomes making plays and keeping the season alive on 4th down, and the number of times where it was like one play for the Niners and they're Super Bowl champs and they couldn't make it. So you look at that, the Chiefs are still the Chiefs, and then the Broncos, at least we think, have taken a step backward. And that's based on what they plan to do with Russ of you're not going to convince me Jarrett Stidham is a better option than Russ. Now, a rookie might turn into a better option in 3 or 4 years, but week 1, it's probably not going to be. And then you're dealing with the $85 million in dead cap over the next 2 years that is going to hamstring this franchise. There's no way around it. So they have not closed the gap. The Chiefs last night officially became a dynasty, and they also officially became the best team to ever play in the AFC West. Their run of 8 straight division titles, 6 straight AFC championship game appearances, 4 Super Bowls and 3 championships, including back-to-back, is better than anything anybody in the history of the division, Broncos, Raiders, Chargers, and Seahawks, if you want to go back, have ever done. And Denver has taken a step backward instead of looking at it and saying, hey, we were 8-9 last year, right? We beat the Chiefs. 23-23 with 2.5 minutes left on Christmas Eve. They win that game, they're probably going to the playoffs. How do we build upon that? Instead, this is an organization that has decided, let's take a huge step backwards, tie both our hands behind our back, and see if we can fight against the dynasty. I think it's setting up for a rough couple of years, and it's going to turn into a 10-year run for the Chiefs in this division.
Yeah, you made a lot of good points, obviously, there in the column as well. And specifically, you talk about a line I've harped on a bunch recently, and I think it's a line Greg Penner, the Broncos owner, is going to regret, and that was that he's just as impatient as we are, yet he doesn't make any changes to his staff. He doesn't make any changes to his front office, and he's probably just going to take on a record-breaking dead cap hit when they cut Russell Wilson, but he's just as impatient as we are. I think what he was trying to do that day was tell fans, like, hey, I'm competitive too, guys. I want to win. But if you're going to make that bold of statement and then not do anything, particularly keep the GM and George Payton, who got you in this whole mess, then it's a weird message to send to fans because we've got to watch the Chiefs win the Super Bowl for the 3rd time in 5 years. And I can't sit here today, James, and give you any sort of path that the Broncos can unseat the Chiefs, like you said, in the next year after, heck, the next 5 years. I mean, barring Mahomes getting hurt, which no one is rooting for because you're a jerk if you're rooting for injury, there is just no path for the Broncos to catch the Chiefs. So I agreed with your column that they're just sitting around doing nothing while the folks 600 miles down the road are building a dynasty, and that's a depressing thought as a fan of the Denver Broncos.
It is, and if you're a fan of any team in the division, if you're an owner of any franchise in the division, it should irritate the heck out of you. So then the question becomes, well, what are you doing about it? We'll see if Antonio Pierce turns out to be a good coach. He was a good interim coach with the Raiders, but they have huge question marks, right? They don't have a quarterback. They have an inexperienced head coach that there's going to be some growing pains there. We've seen plenty of that here in the last 8 years, right? With 3 first-time head coaches, they all had some growing pains.
Sure.
The Chargers, though, I mean, you go all in on Jim Harbaugh, and you got Justin Herbert at quarterback, and you got a roster that is as talented when everybody's healthy and everybody's there.
Yeah, you got Eckler, you got Keenan Allen, you got Mike Williams, like playmakers the Broncos could dream of having.
Khalil Mack and Bosa, and like they're loaded on both sides of the ball. Derwin James, I mean, you name it, they got a ton of talent. That's a team that you're looking at saying, all right, they're trying to end the run. I like Greg Penner a lot. I do. He seems like the kind of guy that wants to win and is competitive in his first year plus of owning the team. I know it's the Walton Penner family ownership group, but he's the face of it. He's the one that comes out and has press conferences.
He's the new Joe Ellis. He's the day-to-day guy.
Yeah.
And frankly, he's the new Pat Bowlen before that.
They did a lot of things that suggested they want to win now, right? It was the Russell Wilson contract. It's $250 million, $242.6 million. That's a big deal. They ate the Nathaniel Hackett contract 15 games in. They, spent the most, their first round of free agency a year ago, they spent more than any other team by a mile.
They did.
Giving out nearly $250 million in contracts a year ago. So there are a lot of things that suggest, hey, this guy wants to win. But now, after he said, hey, I'm as impatient as everybody else, you got George Payton getting up there and saying, we're not going to be very active in the first wave of free agency. It's like, I get it. You can't spend big every single year. But you can spend big 2 years in a row. I'm not quite with you that the salary cap's a myth.
A myth.
And it doesn't exist. At some point, you have to pay the piper. But when you have a ton of cash, you are right that there are a million ways to manipulate the cap.
What Sean Payton did for years and years in New Orleans.
When you have a ton of cash, yeah, it'll come up and catch up to you at some point. And it did the Saints a little bit after Sean Payton left. But worry about tomorrow. Let's worry about today. They're suggesting that they're not going to do a lot to try and end this run by the Chiefs right now. And look, if you want to make the argument to me that, hey, this is a team that needs to hit the reset button, they need to rebuild, they should have done it after Super Bowl 50, okay, that's fine. And if you want to take a quarterback at 12 and that's how you start the process, again, that's fine. Then why did you hire Sean Payton? He's a win-now head coach with the Super Bowl title on his resume who's never developed a young quarterback. That's not the guy you hire for a rebuild. So you can sell me on that plan. Okay, I've said this, short of Philip Lindsay, who I think is now, competing with me for president of the Russell Wilson fan club. There's no bigger fan of Russ in this town than me. I wouldn't
disagree with that.
I don't think he's the problem. But, Will, I've said all along, look, if you've got a plan, you want to go a different direction, if it's Michael Penix Jr., if it's whoever, you're going to somehow trade up and get Caleb Williams, I'm on board. I am. I don't think Russ is the be-all, end-all. He's not Patrick Mahomes, clearly. But the plan has to make sense. And I don't see a plan that makes any sense with what this organization is doing at the moment.
Yeah, right now they feel like an organization without a plan, and it felt like the Sean Payton hire, and we've talked about it. They flew back to Ann Arbor to beg Jim Harbaugh. Well, now we're going to get to see that play out in real time because they're going to play each other twice a year. That will be settled probably sooner rather than later of who would have been the better hire. Now, you can't force Harbaugh to come. If he tells you no, he tells you no. But that is what it is. They wanted D'Amico Ryans, and then he just said, no, I'd rather be in Houston with my family. So it felt like Payton was the one they had to settle on because if they didn't settle on Sean, they were going to have to start the interviews all over again. There wasn't really any other candidates that we had heard. Those were always the three names that were in the running. So now when you look at the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl last night and you sit here and go, okay, so we're going to take on the biggest dead cap in NFL history. We're going to keep the GM who put us in this position. Yeah, maybe we're going to draft a quarterback at 12, but what's stopping Sean Payton from doing this for another year or two and then saying deuces? Because what's the best way to stunt the growth of a young quarterback? Constantly changing his head coach, constantly changing his coordinator. And if you draft J.J. McCarthy and you go 4-13 next year, and Sean Payton's going, that Fox set looks awful nice. You know what's a good way to screw up J.J. McCarthy and make him the next Zach Wilson? Constantly changing the head coach.
Well, not only that, Will, and I'm with you, that would set any young quarterback back. But you also may take the wrong guy because you're taking the guy that fits Sean Payton's system. Right? Like, oh, well, we got to take Bo Nix or we got to take J.J. McCarthy because he's more of a processor and he's going to go through his progressions and he's going to be Drew Brees 2.0. Well, that makes sense if Sean Payton's here. Maybe. I'm still not convinced of it, but maybe. But if Sean Payton, you're right, he looks at it and says, man, I just had to deal with $35 million of dead cap, and next year it's $49 million. I'm out. And now you got a guy that shouldn't have gone number 12, but you picked him because he matched the head coach, and now the head coach isn't here. You have a mess on your hands. Here's the other thing, and this is a little bit of crying over spilled milk, but how much more excitement would there be for this offseason? D'Amico Ryans he was my choice. He would have been a great option, obviously. He did great things in Houston, but whoever. Any other coach, and you had 2 first-round picks, and you had the 44th overall pick in the draft because you kept your second rounder. You had 3 picks in the first 44. Instead, you got Sean Payton, who's running your quarterback out of town and saddling you with $85 million of dead cap because he wants to run his system.
Yeah, that is an underrated wrinkle that never gets talked about with Sean Payton. They had to trade for him, and they had to give up premium players and picks to get him. I mean, essentially, they traded Bradley Chubb for Sean Payton because of that first-round pick via Miami.
So, yeah, would you rather have the 12th overall pick, Bradley Chubb, and 44, or the 12th overall pick, and I don't have it in front of me. I don't know where the Dolphins would have been picking, but 24, 25? So 12, 24, and 44.
And Jim Harbaugh.
Right.
Or D'Amico Ryan. I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer in retrospect. Of course you would rather have the other
Ben
one.
Johnson away from Detroit, or, Brian Callahan, who ended up getting a gig this go-around, or whoever. I mean, it just is because
and if you had just kept Jerry Rosburg, and I know the Jer Bear is a joke and all that, but he wanted the job. If you had just kept Jerry Rosburg, then you would have been in this hiring cycle. Because I've actually heard some people say, oh, maybe they should have kept Hackett. No. They should have never kept Hackett. I'm never going to argue for that. But if you had just said, yeah, you know what? Jerry Rosburg did so much good in those last 2 games. He's going to be our coach next year. Then you could have punted to this cycle, and you didn't have to panic hire Sean Payton after Jim Harbaugh told you no and D'Amico Ryans went with the more attractive girl.
Well, it makes you wonder what the conversations were with Jim Harbaugh. Because if you got the sense that, hey, he just has unfinished business at Michigan, then the route you're talking probably would have made more sense. Or
you're saying, okay, go let him win his natty and then we'll hire him next year.
Correct. Or go hire a first-year guy that you don't have to trade 2 premium picks for. You don't have to give him a 5-year, $90 million contract. And if he stinks, you just eat it and hire Harbaugh this go-around.
Yeah, but then you would have gotten into that whole Greg Penner's already fired 2 head coaches in 2 years. No, but I'm saying the Jer Bear would have been easier because it would have been, hey, we're just giving him another season with the interim tag still.
Sure. Fine. Either route. I mean, you just came out of a coaching cycle where Bill Belichick and Mike Vrabel didn't get jobs. Now, I wouldn't want Mike Vrabel here. I don't know that there would be anything worse than the last 5 years than being a Tennessee Titans fan, watching paint dry on a weekly basis.
Sure.
But he's an accomplished coach, and he didn't get hired. Bill Belichick, the greatest coach of all time, didn't get hired. And instead, you traded away 2 premium picks, 2 picks in the top 44, and saddled yourself with a guy you can't move on from.
Well, and you said something really interesting a couple of minutes ago. You said you can't draft a quarterback for Sean Payton if Sean Payton's just going to bail and it turns out to be the wrong guy. When have we seen that movie before, James? You hired Nathaniel Hackett for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers bailed, and you were stuck with the most incompetent coach in Denver Broncos history. And I know Josh McDaniels was bad, but Hackett was worse. That's a different story, different discussion for a different day. But oh my goodness, can you imagine if the franchise does that twice in 2 years at the 2 most important things? Hey, we hired the wrong head coach because we thought we were going to get Rodgers. And then, hey, Sean really likes Bo Nix, so we have to draft Bo Nix, and I'm just throwing out a player. Turns out Bo Nix kind of stinks. He's been in college for 6 years. Broncos go 4-13, and Sean says, I'm going to go work with Gronk and Jimmy Johnson. That's more fun than being here in Denver losing 13 times a season. I mean, the mess that you would be left in for that, because then you're looking at Paxton Lynch 2.0, and in retrospect, how far back did Paxton Lynch set the Denver Broncos? Many a years, particularly because they took him in 2016. John was scared off in 2018 with Josh Allen on the board. It was a little too soon with what happened with Paxton to take a first-round quarterback again. There's just so many different things in this domino of bad events that could have gone differently. The Broncos wouldn't be in this spot, and unfortunately they are.
And that's the potential scenarios if they go down the route that is a plan that doesn't make much sense. But let's spin it, right? Like, okay, there's still the opportunity to go down a path that does make sense. And we can go back to when Russ got benched and you and I doing this show. And I asked you, I said, what do you think the percentage is that Russell Wilson's here next year? And you said 0. I'm like, it ain't 0. And I was like, it's 1 to 5%. What do you think it is now?
It's gone up from 0. It's gone up from 0, but I still think it's 0.1.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. The head coach and the quarterback do not like each other.
I get it. You're not wrong on that front. But my explanation for why he could be here remains the same as it was six weeks ago, is that they wanted him to move the trigger for guaranteeing 2025. My guess is we've never heard where they wanted to move it to, right? They didn't ask him to waive it completely. They wanted him to move it because it's now, March 18th? It's 5 days into the league year. You're into the start of free agency, but you have no idea who you might be able to get at 12. Some idea, but the draft hasn't happened. Let's just play the hypothetical that they wanted him to move it to May 1st. let the draft happen, and then we'll do something. That would make sense because they would know if they got their guy at 12.
Sure.
If they look at the board, if they go to the combine here in a couple of weeks, if they're doing all their assessment and analysis and they're like, you know what, there ain't a guy at 12 we want, then Russ is their best option by a mile.
Yeah,
by
because
a mile.
you're going to pay Russ either way.
Correct.
So whether Russ plays for the Falcons, the Steelers, or the Broncos, you're still writing the check.
The big portion of it, yes.
And if you really only like Williams, May, and Daniels, and they go 1, 2, 3, and it's just not possible for you to get to 1, 2, or 3, the Bears, the Commanders, and the Patriots dig their heels in, then yeah, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell Russ, hey, we're sorry, we screwed up, please come back? Or are you just going to swallow your pride and draft Bo Nix at 12 and say Bo Nix was the plan all along? I think Sean Payton's got a big enough ego on him. He drafted the QB at 12 and still running Russ out of town.
Maybe. But the smart move, the prudent move, would be to look at it and say, hey, you know what? We sat Russ down because we did not want him to get hurt in the last 2 games and limit our options. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. That actually is really, really smart. The season was over. You weren't going to make it to the postseason. The only way you were going to make it worse was he gets hurt, and now you're stuck with him even if you have a guy at 12 that you want to take.
Sure.
And you've limited your options. So they kept their options open. They looked around and decided Russ is our best bet. Because here's what I would like to see.
Yeah, but you're also rewriting history with what you just said. That you're acting like that this was the plan all along. They would fall, backwards into this plan if that's how this all ends up shaking out. There's no way this was their plan 6 weeks ago.
I don't think it was their plan. I do think it was the reason why they benched him. I was on with Josh Dover that day, and to a person, all of us, I think we had Kliss on that day. Maybe it was Troy. It was like, yeah, it was money related. Then we started hearing about the NFLPA thing and the investigation and the fact that that it's all went back to the bye week. And then the spin became, it was about performance. That was never anybody's thought at the moment it happened. It was all money, 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 money. So it was spin. And you know what? The money part of it is fine. It's a business. That was the smart thing to do. I'm not being critical of them for that. That was the way to go. But I would like to see, if you're going to pay him this year anyway, and maybe you can get him to, at this point, because maybe Russ has looked around a little bit too, to restructure or rethink, hey, how does that guaranteed money work down the road? I would like to see, what can this team do? Having gone 8-9, Russ didn't play in the last 2 games. Maybe they go 9-8 if he does. And you go get some weapons around him. You take Brock Bowers at 12.
Stud tight end out of Georgia.
You go sign a wide receiver or a running back. Courtland Sutton had a really good year. If he was your number 2 receiver, you'd be cooking with gas, right? You just don't want him being the number 1 guy. I would like to see what that looks like when you're not throwing the ball to Adam Troutman, handing it to Javonte Williams, getting 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and throwing to a bunch of number 2s at best.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point of, is Russ and his team right now playing a big old game of musical chairs? And they're doing what we're doing. They're looking at, there's 32 of these jobs around the NFL. And guess what? The chair in Chicago is going to get sat on by Caleb Williams. That means Justin Fields is finding a new chair.
Yep.
And the report today from Adam Schefter is that Mike Tomlin loves Justin Fields. So that could wipe out the Pittsburgh option. Commanders need a QB, they take 1 at 2. Patriots need a QB, they take 1 at 3. All of a sudden, you're starting to look at it, James, and you're going, where can Russ land one of these 32 jobs if you're on Russ and
Atlanta.
Russ's team?
That's it.
And that's pretty much it. We won't go through team by team, but if you really look at it, deep dive it, the Falcons may be at if Justin Fields ends up in Pittsburgh. And so then, yes, I think you're on to something that Russ's team is probably looking at that and going, yeah, we really don't like Sean Payton, but we'd much rather you be a starter in the NFL next year than holding a clipboard. And maybe the only place you can start next year is in Denver.
Well, and you're getting $37 million either way in 2024. But if you're his team, you're looking at it of, well, how do we get the most money in 25? Right? So let's say the Broncos cut him and he signs for $1 million with Atlanta. Then he's basically playing on a prove-it contract to try and get a big deal in 25. Is that more likely to go well? Or are you more likely to say, you know what, that 50 that I'm supposed to get in 25, let's make that 20 guaranteed and have 30 of it, or restructure it in some way or the other where you can make all your money, but it's going to be based on, hey, how do you play? How does 24 go?
A la Peyton Manning in 2015.
Correct. Exactly.
When it was a big deal that John took $4 million away, but he earned $2 million back for winning the AFC title game and $2 million back for winning the Super Bowl.
Exactly. And everybody went away happy. And you know what? That was a tough thing to go ask one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time to do, a guy who a year before had set every record and they still stand. But it was, hey, what's a win-win or can be a win-win for the player and the team? I want to see what
I also think John should have never have done that, but that's a different discussion for a different day.
I want to see what this team could do building upon what they had last year. I do. And they had mediocre skill position guys around their quarterback. They did.
Okay, but it's oil and water. It's fire and ice. Like, you're living in this utopia where I want to see it. Well, we saw it. And the head coach and the quarterback don't like each other. So you're
Well, wait. Sorry to interrupt you. And I think that's probably likely. It's probably likely.
James, he ripped him to ESPN and said, stop kissing babies like you're a politician. He told him to stop FaceTiming Drew Brees. He told him he didn't want to sit with him at the Super Bowl because he'd rather talk to Joe Montana. There's a mountain of evidence Sean doesn't like Russ.
Okay, if you don't want to hang out with them at the Super Bowl, it doesn't mean you don't like somebody.
I mean, can't come to dinner?
They're not your best friend, and that's okay. I don't care if they're best friends.
In this utopia,
I don't need him to be Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson.
In this utopia you're living in, this plan, either Russ is going to have to swallow a big old pride pill and readjust his contract, which I don't think is likely, or Sean is going to have to say, yeah, I'll coach Russ the way Russ should be coached and not my system that I always had with Drew that was so successful. I don't think any of those things are happening.
Well, if I'm Greg Penner, let's go back to the start of this conversation. If I'm Greg Penner, I'm going into Sean Payton, and I'm saying, if we move on from Russell Wilson, what is your plan? And if his plan is J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix, I'm saying, you know what? I'm paying you $18 million a year. I don't care about your system. Go figure it out with Russell Wilson. I'm paying that guy a lot of money. I'm paying you a lot of money. You should be able to make it work. You know what John Harbaugh did? He went to a Super Bowl and won it with Joe Flacco, and he's won a lot of games with Lamar Jackson. Could there be two quarterbacks with more contrasting styles than those two guys? That makes John Harbaugh a great head coach. What are you, Sean? You can only win playing your system? That's what I would say if I was Greg Penner.
Okay.
I got a lot of money invested in you two guys. Go figure it out.
I get it. I get it. And I would love for Greg Penner to intervene and say that too and tell them they better make it work. But what evidence do we have that Greg Penner is going to be that kind of owner, where he's going to tell his head coach and his quarterback how to treat each other, how to get along, how to work together? Greg Penner to me seems like a very more reserved guy. I'm going to let the football guys do the football things guy, and not the Jerry Jones or the Mark Cuban of the world, where he's going to go start slamming doors around Dove Valley, telling them they better make it work.
I get that, and I don't want him to be the Jerry Jones type, and I want him to stay out of football decisions for the most part. But the money he paid Sean Payton, the money he paid Russell Wilson, which Russell Wilson will never play a down of his new contract if they cut him, and the dead money that they're going to eat, this is a business decision as much as it is a football decision.
It is, but he tells us he's as impatient as we are, and then he doesn't make any changes. Like, he should have let George Payton go when he let Nathaniel Hackett go. And then George gets to do a whole nother year, and then this marriage between Russ and Sean falls apart. And I'm just saying, I think the Broncos country and the fans, they want to feel like someone is being held accountable for the 7th straight losing season, and instead all they've done is raise ticket prices. That doesn't feel like anyone's getting held accountable to me as a Broncos fan.
I agree. And that was the end of my column. It was like, you can tell me you're as impatient as me, but you're not. You're not. I've been the one that's been, as a lifelong Broncos fan, has been watching the worst stretch of NFL football in the history of this city. Yeah, I'm impatient. I don't want to take a step backward and eat and have 2 years just go up in flames because you're going to eat the biggest amount of dead cap in the history of the league.
Yeah.
I don't. And if you're impatient, you don't want to either, because that is the most patient route I can imagine. And I don't know that this town wants to sign up for 10 years of futility.
Yeah, just don't tell me you're impatient. Show me you're impatient.
Agreed.
And you know what? Fixing the relationship between Sean and Russ, that would show me he's impatient. So if he can do that, more power to him. That's what you want to see. I'm not holding my breath that it'll happen, but you never know.